The mornings always began the same way. I'd wake before the sun, wrap myself in the flannel robe Bram gave me for Mother's Day 8 years ago, and start the coffee. I liked the quiet hum of the house before it filled with footsteps, phone calls, and the clicking of Bram's laptop. It was the only part of the day that still felt like mine. I laid out his dress shirt on the ironing board, smoothing the fabric, slowly pressing each sleeve with precision. His job interview was at 10, and even though Bram was 30 now, I still felt the need to make sure everything was perfect. He hadn't asked me to, of course. He never really asked. He just assumed. But I'd long since convinced myself that was what love looked like, showing up before being called. While the shirt cooled, I checked his resume again. The file had 2 typos I'd caught last night, and I quietly fixed them before printing 3 fresh copies. I slipped them into a folder, then placed it on the counter next to his breakfast plate: scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, and half an avocado with salt and chili flakes, the way he liked. He wandered in. Minutes later, hair still damp from the shower phone in hand. "Thanks, Ma," he muttered, without looking up. I smiled anyway. "Good luck today. You've got this." He nodded absently, already scrolling. By the time I turned to pour my coffee, he was gone, the front door clicking shut behind him. I sat down alone at the kitchen table, steam curling from my cup. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the ache of being useful, but unseen. My mother used to call it the curse of being too reliable. At the time, I thought she was just bitter. Now, I wondered if she had only been early. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before picking up. "Hello, hi, is this Mrs. Langford?" a warm female voice asked. "Yes, speaking. This is Nadine Kessler, Bram's future mother-in-law. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Oh, no, not at all," I said, quickly straightening in my seat, though she couldn't see me. "I was calling to invite you to dinner on Friday. Just something casual. My husband and I thought it would be nice to finally sit down as one big family before the wedding planning picks up." I blinked, caught off guard. "That sounds lovely. Thank you. I'd be happy to." "Great. We'll see you at 7. She hung up before I could ask what I should bring. I stared at the receiver in my hand a long time after the line went dead. It was the first time anyone from Bram's future had reached out to me directly. For the rest of the day, I moved a little lighter. I baked lemon loaf and folded towels and watered the windowsill herbs, the whole time thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I'm finally being seen. By Friday, I had chosen a soft lilac blouse and set my hair in loose waves. I even bought a bottle of Chardonnay that had Fresh Start written on the label. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I told myself that this would be the night things shifted. I would sit at that table, not as someone who once raised Bram, but as someone who still belonged. I arrived 15 minutes early, Chardonnay tucked under my armheart, thudding with a nervous rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The Keslers lived in a spacious colonial just north of town, all white shutters and manicured bushes. Their porch light was already glowing, casting a soft amber pool at their front door. Nadine greeted me with that warm, practiced smile some women seem to wear like perfume. She took the wine and motioned me inside. "Oh, you're early, perfect. Could you help me set the salad on the table?" I followed her into the kitchen, slipping off my coat and rolling up my sleeves. The table was already half-dressed with tall white candles in glass cylinders and place cards written in delicate cursive. Mine read, "Calla, centered between Nadine and Marcy, the cousin, I presumed. Bram's out back with the others," she said over her shoulder as she rinsed lettuce. "You'll hear them. They've already opened the whiskey." I smiled politely, nodding, and carried the wooden salad bowl into the dining room. Laughter filtered in through the back doors. Bram's laugh unmistakably deep and casual. I couldn't help myself. I moved toward the patio door, slowly drawn by the sound of his voice, like a moth to something warm and flickering. I paused just behind the curtain, not to eavesdrop, but to listen just for a second, just to hear how he sounded with them. And then I heard it. "Honestly, she's basically a free maid," he said, his voice light, joking. "After we're married, we'll finally have a proper home, fresh start." Someone laughed. A woman. Another man added something I didn't catch. But that sentence clung to the air, vibrating. Not my mom. Not the woman who raised me. Just she. A maid. A placeholder. A background fixture. My hand tightened around the curtain edge. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. My face flushed hot, then cold. I took a careful step back, steadying myself against the doorframe as if I were the one who had tripped over something. I didn't say a word, didn't storm out, didn't confront him. I walked quietly to the kitchen, told Nadine that something had come up and that I was so sorry to leave early. She tilted her head, concerned, but didn't ask questions. I kept my face steady and warm until I turned out of the driveway. In the car, my hands stayed at 10 and 2, rigid, my eyes dry but burning. I replayed his words again and again, wondering if it had slipped out or if it had always been there, just waiting for the right audience. Back home, I placed the unopened wine bottle on the counter and sat down without turning on the lights. The silence in the house didn't comfort me this time. It echoed. I sat there long enough to see the shadows stretch and fade again, wondering what else he had said about me when I wasn't around. Bram was 3 when his father left. No warning, no explanation. That made sense. Just a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I can't do this anymore." I remember sitting on the floor with Bram curled against my chest, both of us too stunned to cry, though only one of us understood what had actually happened. From that day forward, it was just us. Me and Bram. I took a job at the school library because it offered decent hours and health benefits. At night, I cleaned offices downtown, vacuumed beige carpets, emptied trash cans filled with crumpled takeout wrappers and shredded paper. I'd come home just after midnight, toes aching, hands raw, and still managed to pack Bram's lunch before crawling into bed. I never remarried. I told myself it was because I wanted to give Bram all my focus, but the truth was, I didn't have energy left for anyone else. I skipped vacations, turned down weekends away, told myself it was fine. He needed me more than I needed rest. I remember the year he got into Oregon State. He was so proud, waving the acceptance letter in the air like a prize ribbon. We celebrated with Chinese takeout. I never told him I'd quietly emptied my emergency fund to cover the deposit. That same year, I canceled a long overdue dental surgery so I could wire him rent when his roommate bailed. And I never resented it. Not once. Every dollar spent, every night of lost sleep, every time I said no to myself so I could say yes to him, it felt like breathing. Automatic. Natural. Love in its truest form. There's still a drawing taped to the fridge. He made it in first grade. It's a crude sketch of the two of us, me with a triangle skirt and giant hair, him with stick arms and a cape. Above my head, in crooked pencil, it says, "My hero." I used to look at that drawing when I was tired, when bills stacked too high, or when I was scrubbing dried spaghetti sauce off the stove at midnight. I'd glance at it and remind myself why it all mattered. Tonight, I stood there, staring at it, unable to move. The house was quiet, too quiet, cold even with the heat running. I placed my hand flat on the fridge door palm, over the drawing like I could press it into my skin. Remind myself it once meant something, but even that little scrap of paper suddenly felt like a souvenir from a country I was no longer welcome in. I didn't confront him. I didn't bring up the dinner or what he said. I told myself I needed time to think, to understand if it had been a single careless moment, or the reflection of something long buried, long ignored. So instead of speaking, I started watching. I noticed the way Bram never said thank you. Not when I picked up his dry cleaning, not when I ironed his shirts, not even when I stayed up late filling out his insurance paperwork after he'd tossed it on the table with a shrug. It was just expected, like the sun rising or coffee brewing itself. He dropped laundry on the hallway floor instead of the basket, even when it was 3 feet away. He left dirty dishes in the sink, with food still crusted to the edges. And when his friends came by last Saturday, he introduced me not as his mother, but as Kala. No context. No warmth. Just a name as if I were the cleaning lady. That night, I sat in bed with my journal open. The pen hovered for a moment before I wrote just one sentence. I am not a service. I underlined it twice, then closed the book and turned out the light. A few days later, I called Odette. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer, but something in me needed to hear a voice that remembered who I was before I became background. She met me at the cafe by the park, the one we used to walk past on our lunch breaks. She still carried herself like the woman who could silence a classroom with a glance even in retirement. After I told her everything about the dinner, the comment, the drawing on the fridge, she sat back and folded her hands. Respect isn't owed, she said. It's taught. And when we keep giving it away without asking for it back, we teach people how to forget us. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I left the kitchen clean, the fridge full, but no plate waiting on the table. Bram came home, late, talked on the phone in the hallway, and never asked if I'd eaten. He didn't notice the silence, the absence. And that told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet titled 24 Years of Labor. I spent 2 full evenings at the kitchen table surrounded by old folders, grocery receipts, and the kind of records only a mother keeps. I had files labeled school fees, medical, and emergencies. I had tax returns where his name appeared under dependents long after the law required it. I sifted through it all without emotion, as if I were balancing someone else's account. I opened a blank document on my laptop and began to itemize it line by line, year by year. The total wasn't what mattered. It was the truth each entry held. I formatted it like an invoice. I even added a small thank you for your business note at the bottom. It wasn't a joke, but I knew he would think it was. The night I gave it to him, I made dinner like usual. Pasta, salad, garlic bread. I wanted things to feel familiar, even as everything between us was shifting. We sat across from each other in the dim light, and when we finished, I slid the envelope across the table. He opened it without hesitation, skimmed the first few lines, then laughed. You serious, Mom? He said, still grinning. You want a refund for raising me? I looked at him, and in that moment, I saw every year I'd lost. Every late night, every postponed dream, every small way I'd disappeared so he could shine brighter. No, I said calmly. I want recognition. But since that's too expensive, I'll settle for separation. He blinked, confused, like I'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. I stood up, slowly took my plate to the sink, and began washing it one deliberate motion at a time. He didn't say anything else. He sat there with the invoice in his hands, like he didn't know what to do with it. Later that night, when he'd gone to bed, I folded the receipt copy and placed it in a file labeled Proof. Then I pulled out my suitcase from the back of the closet and unzipped it for the first time in over a decade. I packed light. One suitcase, a canvas tote of books, and the blue folder labeled Proof. Everything else could stay. I didn't need reminders or apologies folded in the corners of drawers. I left the sheets on the bed, the food in the fridge, and a clean house behind me, not out of kindness, but because it no longer belonged to me. Odette met me at the curb just after 9. She didn't ask questions. She opened the trunk, helped me with my bag, and handed me a thermos of tea as I settled into the passenger seat. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but there was nothing left to leak out. I had done my grieving in silence over burnt toast and empty laundry baskets long before this moment ever arrived. Her guest room was small but bright. She'd set out fresh towels and a small dish of wrapped caramels on the nightstand. "You're not a guest," she said. "You're resting." "That's different." The next morning, I updated my resume and walked down to the local library. They were looking for part-time help with filing inventory and desk coverage. I told them I'd done a version of that my whole life. I started the following Monday. The paycheck was small, but it was mine. On Thursdays, Odette and I walked to the corner cafe for lunch. One afternoon, a woman in a charcoal blazer stood by the front table setting out pamphlets. Estate planning for women over 50. I almost passed by, but something in me tugged. I stayed behind after Odette left. The woman, a local attorney named Jess Lerner, had kind eyes and a voice like polished stone strong without needing to be loud. She spoke about power of attorney assets, long-term security, and the rights too many women surrender without even realizing it. I sat there long after the others had left, thumbing the edge of a brochure. Jess noticed. "Thinking about your future?" she asked. "I think I'm finally allowed to," I said. She gave me her card and told me to call when I was ready. I tucked it into my wallet behind the grocery list I'd written a week ago and no longer needed. That night, I returned home and placed my first paycheck on the dresser like a quiet declaration. In the morning, I would open a new bank account, one with just my name on it. It was nearly 3 weeks before I saw Bram again. In that time, I'd started my second week at the library and filed the paperwork for my own checking account. I'd begun sleeping through the night. No creaks in the hallway, no doors slamming, just stillness and breath. When the doorbell rang, I was sorting through a stack of tax forms on the dining table. Odette was out back, pruning her rosemary bush. I opened the door and found him there. Bram standing on the porch in a wrinkled hoodie, his hair flattened on one side, like he hadn't been sleeping right either. "Hey," he said, almost sheepish. I didn't speak. I just waited. "She called off the engagement," he said finally. "Marcy, her parents. They said some things they overheard bothered them. About you." He shifted his weight hands buried in his pockets like they could hold his shame. "I didn't mean it, Mom. I was just trying to be funny. You know how I get when I'm nervous. You've been saying unfunny things for years, Bram," I said quietly. He blinked, but didn't look surprised. "Just tired. I think maybe you should come home." I looked past him at the street. The same street I used to stand on while waiting for his school bus lunchbox swinging at my side. The same corner where I'd driven him to driver's ed to prom to college. The street hadn't changed, but I had. "Home is where I'm respected," I said. "That place never was." His mouth parted slightly as if to argue, but then he closed it. The silence between us stretched like thread pulled too tight. "I miss you," he added. I nodded once. "That's not the same as valuing someone." He didn't respond, just stood there a few more seconds, then turned and walked back down the steps, slow and uncertain. I watched him disappear around the hedge, and I didn't follow. Inside, the kettle began to whistle. I returned to the table, turned off the burner, and poured myself a cup. I sat down with my paperwork and picked up my pen, my hand steady as ever. The phone buzzed next to me, an email from Jess Lerner confirming our consultation. The business started small, just a few women Odette knew from church or the garden club. They brought manila folders packed with years of ignored paperwork, grocery receipts, utility bills, care calendars scribbled in pencil, and unpaid hours that stretched decades. I listened, sorted, calculated. I watched their shoulders drop as the numbers added up, not just in dollars, but in validation. I called it second balance, and within a month I had 10 clients and a waiting list. I didn't advertise, not in any traditional way. The women found me through whispers, hallway mentions, coffee shop referrals. They came looking for clarity and left knowing what their time had really been worth. I worked from the guest room Odette had turned into an office. My laptop sat on a second-hand desk, and on the wall above it, I hung the first invoice I ever made, the one I gave Bram. It sat in a simple white frame next to a wooden sign I had carved downtown. Calla Langford, Domestic Equity Consultant. The words made me pause the first time I saw them printed, not because they were bold, but because they were mine. One afternoon, while finalizing a quarterly report for a client, my phone lit up with a message. Bram, happy birthday. I hope you're well. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I set the phone face down beside me. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. The thing is, I never left because I wanted to punish him. I didn't walk out to make a point or to wait for some apology that would never come. I left because I finally saw the outline of my own life, and I was no longer willing to live it erased. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want it. I wanted air. I wanted space wide enough to hold my name and all it had endured. And somewhere between the invoices and the late-night tea and the women who now called me not to take, but to learn, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years real. I didn't walk away for revenge. I walked away to remember who I was.